Okay, folks, we'll get started. Thank you for your patience and good evening. It is December 13th at 6:30. I'd like to call the Wilmington Wildwood Early Childhood Center School Building Committee to order, and we'll start with a roll call this evening.
Roll call. Kate Bissell. Here. Christine Hollorn. Here. Susan Inman. Here. David Roxdale.
Here.
Marianne Galezzo.
Here.
Michael Camos. I apologize. Camasio. Thank you. Christine Prendergast. Here. Justin.
Here.
Dr. Glenn.
Here.
And I'm here, Vivian Verbeeden, as well as Dennis Kelly.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Paul, I apologize. Paul
Here.
Ruggiero is here as well. He's here.
All right, thank you. We'll proceed through the agenda. The second item of business tonight is the approval of minutes from our last Wildwood School Building Committee meeting. Looking for a motion to approve.
I think we need to table that. Oh, if you want to hop, just a suggestion, I have somebody coming that might be able to swear Dennis in tonight so that you'll be able to do minutes. Can I make one mention of, it looks like I'm present on the Finance Committee piece of that minutes, which I was, and then I did stay for the meeting too, but it looks like I'm not present on the main meeting of that, so if that has to be changed, that would be the one that
You took that in the minutes to reflect that Susan Inman was present at the building meeting.
All right, so I'm going to pass over item number 2 then. It sounds like the approval of the minutes. And with that, also approval of invoices.
Yes, to them to be in.
Okay. Moving on then at this point to item number 4. And tonight, this meeting is they're all big and important meetings, but certainly tonight, the opportunity for our design team, Dorn Whittier, to share with this committee and with the Wilmington community insight in terms of a lot of work and planning that has been underway for the last number of weeks. The bulk of this meeting is around starting to give our community and this committee a sense of where possibly this project is heading. Having been myself, along with Paul and other members of our team, Ms. Bissell, very closely connected to this work, I can tell you that a lot of good work is happening, important work happening. It really will be foundational for the possible direction of this project. So again, for those watching at home, in the community, all of the materials that are going to be referenced in this meeting will be made available through the district website. We have a page that is growing, amassing a lot of information connected to this project, and all of the presentations and other material will be posted on that webpage. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jason Boone from Dorn Whittier.
Thank you, Dr. Brand. So in terms of the educational program planning update, Dr. Brand mentioned that a lot of work has been happening over the previous several weeks. Most of that work has focused on defining what's called the space summary templates. As everyone knows, we have 3 grade configurations to explore here, and each one of those 3 needs a space summary template, a document that communicates what spaces are expected to be in the project. We're going to share that work product with you later in this meeting. Dr. Brand mentioned a group that has been focused on that work. It was the working group with extended to include other staff members. And we spent more than 10 hours over the course of 3 meetings working through those space summaries. In addition to that, another key document that will form the basis of this project is something called the Educational Program Narrative. And Dr. Brand and his team have been working to craft that language around what the educational intent for the project would be. And I don't know if Dr. Brand, you want to share any updates on that scope of work?
Sure. So our elementary principals that are the 3 elementary principals connected to the schools on the north side and connected to this project have been meeting with our central office team, and work has already begun intently on this program narrative. An important document that this committee will certainly get to see, and in due course, so too will the school committee. We have discussed this with the leadership team and have recognized the critical importance of having the school committee as the governing body who oversees, of course, programs within the school system to approve that document. It's a dense document that covers really all aspects of the educational program plan. Doran Whittier has been incredibly helpful to point us in the direction of sample program plans that are actually all available publicly on the MSBA website. We are on course a little bit longer term, but quickly will be upon us mid-March to have the school committee ultimately with the document that we'll hope that they will approve. And that will really be a framework, an important framework for this building. After all, it is about teaching and learning and instruction. And we're really digging into those aspects of this possible building, whether it be a pre-K to 5 or pre-K to 3 or a pre-K building.
And related to that work, some of the things that came out of visioning were a desire to explore some new programs for the district, and that would be housed in this project, relocation of some programs, and expansion of other programs. And you'll get more information about that in the upcoming meetings. But some of those things are in the draft space summary templates for tonight, and we encourage you to ask questions about those if you have them. The next thing we'd like to talk about is to finish our reporting out on the visioning work. When we spoke with you last time, we reported out on the overall building diagramming for the pre-K-5, the pre-K-5 grade configuration. Tonight, we're going to report out those same kinds of diagrams for the other 2 grade configurations, and then we're going to facilitate a discussion around the guiding principles for design that should inform all 3 grade configurations. So just to remind you what that overall building diagramming work was, what's on the screen right now is an example that we provided to those in attendance at the visioning. They had several things to prepare for us. In the middle, on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see what's called a bubble diagram. This is a spatial relationship diagram, which is intended to communicate how the various parts of the project relate to one another. Surrounding that are both inspirational imagery, we provided groups with, to help us understand sort of what they're thinking around the look and feel of specific spaces, functions of specific spaces. And then finally, the little sketch vignettes, design patterns we provided, again, to help the group inform the design team of what these spaces really wanted to be. And then the last 2 things we asked them to develop as part of this activity. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a vision statement and then a set of guiding principles. Ultimately, we synthesized all of the work product from that meeting into the rest of the documents you're going to see this evening. This, for example, is one of the outputs from one of the groups. This particular group took on the pre-K-3 grade configuration. And if you remember what we showed last time, this is very similar. The blue spaces are classrooms. So what you're seeing here is a desire to split the project into sort of 2 parts, a lower elementary part and an upper elementary part, even for the pre-K-3 grade configuration, with the shared core spaces in the middle. We shared this diagram with you last time. This is our synthesis of that work for the pre-K-5. And again, a couple of salient principles that are visible here. That same separation on the left-hand side of the drawing, it's meant to communicate a pre-K to 2 grouping. On the right-hand side of the drawing, it's meant to communicate a 3 through 5 grouping with the shared elements in the middle. The idea that the building is organized into developmental groupings, and we're trying to reduce the travel distances for everyone to those shared core elements in the middle, some of the high-level principles that informed this work product. This is a new illustration. This is that pre-K-3 translation. Interestingly, not all groups agreed where first grade should go, so this is very much a work in progress. In this illustration, the left-hand side of the diagram is pre-K through first grade, with the right-hand side being second and 3rd grade. And our internal design team sort of made that judgment call based on the variety of outputs from visioning, because the sites may dictate that something goes upstairs. And if it were separated in this way, then 2nd and 3rd grade could potentially stack on top of pre-K, K, and 1st grade. Again, the shared elements are in the middle, largely for the same reason that we had in the pre-K-5, to reduce travel distances for as many students as possible to those elements.
Just to clarify my question, is this making the assumption that, I'm trying to separate between what's visually represented versus what could be with square footage availability? Visually, this says it's one floor. That's making an assumption. Is this something that could in fact be manipulated to represent 2 floors if you don't in fact have sprawling land?
Terrific question. The answer is, you're exactly right. This is not meant to represent a floor plan diagram. And I'll give you an example of that. Over at the Woburn Street site, we have a significant elevation change from the street side of the site to the field side of the site. This diagram could be implemented there if, for example, pre-K was on the lowest level, kindergarten was on top of them, and then first and second grade were on top of them. So we would try to maintain the relationships that are present in this drawing, knowing that the vertical stacking of them will be dependent on what particular sites we're looking at. North is much more amenable to spreading out. It's flat, there's more area there. The other 2 sites that we're looking at have topography or really constrained with just raw area, and therefore going up may be necessary. Any other questions about this as an illustration? And we do want to encourage questions as we move through. No need to wait until the end.
Just to piggyback off her question, if we were to do pre-K through 5, we're looking at something probably the size of the middle school, right?
We'll get to that later in the presentation.
That was it.
Okay. Jumping ahead of us. And then finally, the pre-K overall building diagramming. And again, you can see that this is still sort of that butterfly model with one grade grouping on one side and the other grade grouping on the other side. With the shared elements in the middle, there are a couple of key programmatic differences here. No centralized cafeteria, for example. No formal gym space, right? A multi-purpose space instead. The possibility of the library being decentralized to celebrate literacy, but books closer to children. Those are represented in this illustration. And they're a little bit unique from the other 2 grade configurations we saw. Unlike the other 2 grade configurations, there are some regulations around who must be on the ground or have direct access to the ground for egress, and both of these age groups would fit in that category. So if in fact we had a 2-story building solution here, both groups would still have to be able to exit at grade. And Woburn Street is really the only site that may offer that sort of opportunity to have students exit at the ground at 2 different levels. But if we were to execute this at the Wildwood site, it would likely want to be a single-story facility for that reason.
How do you incorporate daily operational logistics into the analysis of which model would be better? For example, a library and media center. In the previous example, it's a shared service. So you would be able to leverage shared staff that could facilitate your pre-K through 5 concept. How do we know how many hours of library time is required for a pre-K through 5, and would a shared service library actually even work for us given the population and whatnot, versus a concept here where you have 2 separate libraries, which obviously would offer more flexibility for using that service?
Kate, would you mind talking about sort of what the assumption is around the sort of daily school schedule and library as a special?
Sure. So as mentioned, we've had quite a few meetings to talk about the kind of programming, and we've done a lot of work around looking at the specials, subjects, library, art, music, PE, etc. that are offered currently, how many minutes each grade level has of sudden specials, how those all fit together, how many sections in each grade level. Diane, Stacy, and I, the principals of the other buildings, have a shared document with a kind of draft version of schedule, actually building one to see that it all does work. So we do have that work in terms of the time that would be required to spend in that library with students, with staff.
So you could take that and overlay that to whichever
Yes.
model we develop. Okay.
In fact, those conversations have led to sort of the count and size of all of the things that we're going to share with you in the space summary so far. And it's a really terrific point, because in a situation like this where you have dining in a couple of different places, where you have library in a couple of different places, just because there's more than one location in this drawing, that doesn't necessarily suggest that there needs to be more than one staff member. In this particular model, in particular, pre-kindergarten would likely have library as a group, and then kindergarten would likely have library as a group. But even if their spot is geographically next to them, the staff person would go to where the students are. And so you shouldn't make the assumption about spaces equals staff necessarily.
I just will add, and thank you for the question. The level of detail in this program plan that I mentioned earlier is going to go to those depths. And so we are in need of generating a schedule to cover those bases and analyzing staff. In this document, in fact, we are going to need to highlight how many staff are expected to be present in the building. Keep in mind that we know the enrollment that we're targeting for the opening of the school. And so with Jason's team and Durham Whittier, they will take what we are envisioning for our program and the appropriate staffing to make sure that that can operate and that there's enough space for that. So there's an intersection with all of those things, but it's far more detailed, in fact, than just, we hope to offer library if things go well. It's library is going to be offered alongside health, alongside, et cetera.
Yeah. We
We do have to get that level of detail in the next couple of months. So they take that and look at that.
We'll transition next into those space summaries. A little word about these in particular. Their actual format is an Excel document that the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, prepares as a template, and each row represents a single space in the project. We find that when we're reviewing those with clients, they're hard to follow. And so what we're doing tonight is we're going to represent all of those spaces graphically. And so what you're seeing here, each square, there's 8,000 squares on that page. The gray line around each grouping of spaces represents an MSBA category: core academic, special education, art, music, health, and and so on. So what we've tried to do is represent this, the crude size and shape of every space that's been talked about so far, organize them by department, and then share a few data points about each category. So this is the pre-K 5 space summary, and just for everybody's memory, right? Pre-K 5 is 755 students plus the pre-kindergarten population. And so right now what's being proposed in all of these, with all of these spaces, is a building size of around 168,000 square feet. In each department, we're representing in the upper right-hand corner both what the proposal is and what the MSBA guidelines are, and then in the lower right-hand corner, the difference between those two numbers. We've done that math for you. We want to make an important note here right at the beginning that just because there's an excess of the MSBA guidelines doesn't mean that that square footage is ineligible for reimbursement. Those are two different considerations. And so we can talk a little bit about both of them. But this number is simply representing the raw difference between what's being proposed in terms of net square footage and what the MSBA guidelines are for each category. So in the core academic category, that difference is roughly 12,300 square feet. And we have the next slide will actually articulate why those differences exist. So I won't go through all of these, except to note that our largest overage is in the special education category. And that's very typical. We see that in most of our projects. This is what's been determined necessary to deliver the programs and services for your particular population. In most of the other categories, this leadership working group has actually worked really hard to have a zero net square footage difference. In other words, exactly meet the guidelines for that category. Health and PE is an exception. There's been the idea tossed out that even though an elementary school gymnasium by MSBA guidelines is only 6,000 square feet, that because we're consolidating 3 buildings into one and therefore losing some gym space, there might be real community value in having a conventional high school-sized gymnasium, particularly for community use. And that's something that we would be interested in feedback from this group about whether or not there is value in that. But that's our...
Jason, one quick thing on that.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. When you think about that, though, it's only really, when you're talking about the community, it's only 2 gyms because we've never rented out the Wildwood gym. So that's never been a rented gym. So when you think of that space community-wise, it is 2 gyms.
Okay, appreciate that.
In the core academic space, because I can't see the details, are the larger blocks, or let me ask it the other way. As the kids are older, like 5th grade, are the classroom sizes larger because the kids are bigger?
Actually, the other way around.
Oh, really?
So pre-kindergarten and kindergarten have the largest classroom spaces. One, because they include an embedded toilet in the space,
Oh,
right? The other assumption is that developmentally, these children need to move a lot more. They need a
Yes.
lot more manipulatives. Early education is often largely about play.
yeah.
And so therefore, the younger the child, the larger the classroom space.
Okay.
And that's typical across the whole country, not just here in the
Sure.
Commonwealth. But that's what you're seeing. Across the top, you're seeing kindergarten. The other rows of 6 squares are 1 grade level each, 1 through 5. And then the MSBA has an anomaly where they account for pre-kindergarten in this other category. So you're seeing 4 sort of general education classrooms for pre-K down there in that other category, and you're seeing over here 2 of these self-contained special education classrooms are related to one of the pre-K special education programs. So we're over in the health and PE category largely because of that idea of having a larger gym for community use. We also happen to be over in administration and guidance, and that has to do with, again, how the MSBA accounts for certain kinds of professionals. Student support service professionals who are not exclusively serving students on IEPs, individualized educational plans, or 504 plans, which is a variation of that. The MSBA asks the designer and the community to account for those kinds of offices and service delivery spaces in the administration and guidance category rather than the special education category. And so the overage in the admin and guidance category is entirely related to those service professionals being accounted for in that bucket rather than in the special education bucket. And then finally, we're over in other because we have pre-K. We have pre-K as part of this project. And the little spaces you see at the very bottom are something that we're calling teacher wellness. This is a space attached to a teacher collaboration room that's for private phone calls if you need to make a doctor's appointment for your child. Could serve as a lactation space. And so that's what the little boxes are. And then the other 3 spaces are actually associated with the CARES program, 2 offices and a storage space, all of which currently exist. We're just sort of replicating them and making sure that they're part of what we're planning for.
Can I stop you? Why the additional pre-K? Why 4 additional pre-K classrooms?
The numbers represent what currently exists.
Okay. So why would it be an additional 5,700 square feet?
It's not additional. The MSBA has no guidelines for how many pre-K rooms there are, right? They don't project in their enrollment forecasts pre-K students. And so what was happening when they were in the core academic category, if pre-K was involved in that category, was over the guidelines simply because of pre-K, and folks were getting confused. So they asked designers and districts to now pull that out and put it in the other bucket, which has a guideline of 0, because it's sort of a catch-all for anything that's not in the MSBA guidelines. They will be eligible for reimbursement. They're just not. There's just no MSBA guideline for how many there should be in a project. And if we have the wrong number there, that's exactly what these sort of meetings are for, so that we can make sure we get these right.
I have a question on the core area. So I'm looking ahead a little bit, but
Yeah.
some of the space types make sense. I guess my question is for the 3 additional classrooms, is that for future growth or smaller class sizes?
So that's a terrific question. It's all in the math. And so when the MSBA calculates its number of classrooms for its guidelines, it takes the entire population and divides it by their class size guidelines. Sometimes local guidelines are smaller than the MSBA's guidelines. Sometimes that results in sort of a rounding situation where you get fewer classrooms than you really need to actually operate a whole grade level of students. They're expecting that, it to be a glove fit. And so what we've done is we've said, all right, we're going to take the agreed upon enrollment. The first arithmetic thing we're going to do is divide by 6, K through 5, right? How many students are going to be in each grade? And then use that number to determine how many classrooms are needed for each grade. And so what has happened is, so that we have the same number of sections, grades 1 through 5, it happens to be 3 classrooms beyond what the MSBA math suggests. This has happened in a lot of our projects, and it's happened in a lot of communities across the Commonwealth. Historically, they have not objected to this strategy. In fact, I've got some recent information from the MSBA that they're actually going to change this calculation to match what I just described, rather than do it the way that they have been doing it for the last 15 or so years, for exactly this reason. So yes, there's a little wiggle room in here, but those 3 classrooms are not surplus. They're not for additional growth. They're simply to make sure that there's enough classrooms that each grade level has the same number. And then if there's a bubble year, you'll see in some of the concepts in a few weeks that we're trying to position classrooms close enough together that one could swing into another learning community as those bubble years occur.
Thank you.
On the special education deviation, when do you go to the MSBA and say, listen, we have special ed that needs above and beyond what your calculations are? Where does that happen in the process?
So it happens at every single submission that the design team in the district makes to the MSBA. So the first one of those will be next spring. It's called the preliminary design program submission. And that's where the MSBA will read the educational program narrative. They'll see the translation of that into the space summary, and it'll be the first opportunity they have to render an opinion about whether those spaces will be eligible or not.
Okay.
Historically, they defer to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on this grouping of spaces. And at least in Dorn Whittier's experience, they've never denied something that was identified as a need in this bucket for eligibility.
And I think it's great to do a high school size gym. We're losing gym space. And for this size of school, I think it's a necessity.
And we'll continue to talk about that, but that 6,000 square feet of net, which translates after you multiply it up for toilet rooms and wall thicknesses and that sort of thing, ends up being 9,000 square feet. That delta will be ineligible for reimbursement and will be a locally funded element. But we've heard already that there may be real value in that, even if it is ineligible for reimbursement.
Can we state the case to the MSBA because we're losing 2 other schools? They don't.
Unfortunately,
they don't
no.
care.
Yeah. They draw a hard line related to that.
Yeah, I know we had a problem here too when
With
we
the
did that.
track.
With the track, yeah.
So many of you have already picked up on where and why the deviations exist.
Can I just, is that a typo? Because it says PDP proposed MSB guidelines, and then it says difference.
So the difference is between what's being proposed and the MSBA guidelines, right? So in the core academic category, we're beyond the MSBA guidelines by 12,350 net square feet. Is that what you're asking?
No, the
other.
line item where it says other.
Third from the bottom.
Oh, yeah, so very good catch.
Yeah, I think
Where
it
did I
should
go? That's
be,
the wrong thing.
I think it should be MSBA 0,
Yep,
right?
that's because I keep trying to touch it. That should be a 0. And so the
Should be-
difference is correct. This number is correct. This number should be 0. Thank you for catching that. Other questions about the pre-K 5 space summary?
I guess, general question for all of them going forward. Can you just explain the extended learning areas a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, it's it's a recognition that a classroom can't provide the right environment for all kinds of instructional activities, right? There was a recognition envisioning, for example, where those who participated said, students today learn differently than students did when your current buildings were built. Social emotional needs are different, mental health needs are different, even academic needs are different. And so this is an effort to provide, you'll see in the guiding principles in a minute, this is an effort to provide a wide variety of space types that educators can leverage to reach different students with different kinds of needs and abilities. And so we've got the classroom environment, we've got small group rooms associated with classrooms that are currently positioned between pairs of classrooms, and then we have these extended learning spaces. It may be, for example, that a student support service provider wants to provide some enrichment activities to students who need them without the desire to take them down the hall and around the corner, right? To go provide those services where students are rather than force students to go to where the adult is. That would be something that the extended learning spaces would be really good at. In fact, it's already happening in many of your existing buildings where the hallway is being used for that. This is just an effort to intentionally design those kinds of spaces. Movement activities are another one. A classroom with all of the furnishings that are in there, they're not really all that conducive to lots of movement activities. So again, an extended learning space could provide an opportunity for that kind of instructional activity. It's one of the few spaces in these proposed projects that's malleable. So what the design team will do is, as the floor plans and projects start to develop, we'll see if all of this square footage is needed. And if we can execute that idea in less square footage, then we'll be changing these kinds of numbers. But it's that recognition that we need more learning environments than just the classroom in order to meet the needs of children today. Dr. Brand or Kate, I don't know if you guys want to expand on that at all.
Actually, I would love to too. So it was my favorite part. When we visited the schools, all of the schools had these expansions off their classroom. So some of them was a classroom, and then that learning spot, right? So you could take children into small groups. Some of those were classrooms, and then it was outside their hallway was a designated like other area to take children. In one of the schools, I was able to speak to some teachers. They had been there after school, and I asked them, how do you utilize this space? And she said, oh, well, last year I used it for learning only, but this year I used it for social and emotional because she has children who need it. So those were in every school that we visited, and to be honest with you, they were my favorite part because you do need those spaces, right, for cooperative learning sometimes. My assistant could go out and do an activity, and I could stay with the rest of the kids. Or you're right, if my kids need speech, they don't have to go all the way down to the speech room. They can be, those rooms can be utilized for that. So there's many ways, but those were my favorite parts when we visited the schools, and all of the schools that we visited had them. So, yeah.
Piggyback on that.
Yeah.
Many of the buildings that we visited did have their grade classrooms kind of clustered in sort of a grade level community in some sort of configuration that had a communal space, and that was their extended learning space that they all centered around, and that various groups of students from, let's say, second grade could come out there and work collaboratively with one or more of those staff members to collaborate in a space that was unique to meet the needs of that grade level, while also being accessible immediately outside of their general education classroom. And things like sensory walks, different types of furniture spaces, those things were all available in those spaces as well.
And then for the older kids, the space really allowed for cooperative learning. So there was tables set up, but where that room was, the classroom teacher could still have eyes on what was going on, but they're older, right? So they were, it was meant for them to do a lot of cooperative learning. So yeah, it was unique. Yeah.
One of the really thoughtful things that this expanded working group talked about, and I went back to the graphic version, is, again, based on some of the school tours, where's my cursor go? They nuanced the extended learning by grade grouping. So these smaller ones are kindergarten, and they're more that porch experience that you were just talking about, where it's between a pair of classrooms rather than being sort of a more communal space. These upper grade ones are expected to be sort of that more communal space. And then this one is related to pre-K, there's a desire for the project to be able to adapt to at least some sections of full-day pre-K, and even some half-day students also already eat lunch in the building. And so this is meant to be sort of a multi-purpose environment where it could be sensory related, or it could be indoor play related, or it could be dining related for that particular grouping. So they've nuanced each one of these extended learning experiences based on the developmental needs of each grade grouping, which was a really thoughtful move.
Okay, thank you.
I want to point out one thing here at the bottom. There's a couple of asterisks at the bottom of these categories. Don't want to get into too much technical detail, but if we think about the room we're sitting in, net square footage is the carpet, and gross square footage is the thickness of the walls and the hallway and the toilets down the hall. The MSBA allows a multiplier to account for all of that other stuff. And in the space summary template for this population, that multiplier is currently 1.46. Historically, the MSBA has allowed it to be 1.5. And so what that means in technical terms is that this difference will go down, and this MSBA guideline number will go up, right, when that changes from 1.46 to 1.5. So the difference between what we're proposing, what the MSBA guidelines are, should get closer together when they affect that change. This is the pre-K 3 graphic space summary. Again, to remind everyone that agreed upon enrollment is 510 students plus the pre-K population. The way this working group and the way the design team approached this is as a practice of subtraction. So we started with the biggest program, and then we started taking things out as grades came out of the grade configuration. But all of the differences and the strategies are very similar. We're over in the core academic category. We're over in special education category. We are not over in the health and PE category, and I see that there's another typographic error there. The decision here was because pre-K 3, two of the, at least one of the 3 buildings will remain online, that we may not have the same gym issue that we had with the pre-K 5, and therefore this was an effort to try to keep the size of this particular project smaller, and so it's a standard 6,000 square foot gymnasium rather than the high school size gymnasium. We are still over on admin and guidance for all the same reasons that we were over in the previous example, and similarly in other, we're over because of the pre-K and the CARES program. Questions about the pre-K 3 grade configuration? Then finally, the pre-KK, again, the agreed upon enrollment is 130 students plus the pre-K. It's important to note that the MSBA space summary template was not built for an early childhood project. And so when you get down to populations this small and essentially one grade level, right, kindergarten, the space summary template blows up. And we'll show you some examples of that at the bottom here. But again, it was a process of subtraction where we have the kindergarten classrooms in the core academic category, the pre-K classrooms in the other category. And in this case, I shared with you when I had the overall building diagram up there that there wasn't a conventional gym in this grade configuration. Instead, what's being proposed is sort of a multi-purpose environment that could have health and PE instruction take place in it, but it's not designed for basketball or for ball sports. It's more designed for this age group and potentially even things like indoor play. And so in this particular example, we're actually below the MSBA guidelines by a fair amount, almost 700 net square feet. Any questions about that space summary? I mentioned that the space summary template blows up. When you populate the form, it actually says that the overall size building needs to be smaller than the area of the carpet, which of course is a mathematical impossibility. So the MSBA would sort of correct that in their comments. And their guidelines, instead of being, 23,400 square feet, would be in the 40,000 square foot range.
Is there a possibility in this example to create a full-size gym, acknowledging that we just wouldn't get MSBA reimbursement?
Well, interestingly, we believe that the MSBA would support a full-size gymnasium because it's in their guidelines, even for this population. So if we wanted to change the assumption around that not quite a full-size gymnasium and make it a full-size gymnasium, that's something that we could certainly explore.
Yeah,
But
because
the full-size gymnasium would be for an elementary school and not the double size that you would have for the high school. So depending on how you're referencing full-size, I think would make a distinction.
okay. What I'm referencing is I'm assuming that when we get to the statement that you all are developing, is that we want a space available for the community, nights and weekends, voting day, all of those extracurriculars. So whatever size that means we would need to support that requirement.
That would be closer to a 9,000 square foot gymnasium where the MSBA wouldn't allow it. Therefore, the incremental cost or the upsizing the gym would be on the town.
But you could, instead of proposing a 4,500 square foot gym, which is what I think is in this grouping, you could propose the full 6,000 size gym that comes with a standard elementary school, and the MSBA would render an opinion about that. Because it's already in their guidelines, they would likely support that financially if that was the desire of the community.
Also, in a pre-K building, we wouldn't be losing the Woburn Street and North intermediate gyms.
Right. Okay. Terrific questions. So what we've tried to do is summarize these three scenarios with this table. What's in the left-hand column is our best estimate based on construction drawings and modeling your existing buildings digitally, what the existing gross square footages are for the three buildings under consideration. In this case, because this is the, actually they're all there. Then the next column over is the proposed for this upcoming submission, the MSBA guidelines, and then we've performed a calculation to try to demonstrate efficiency of these. And as expected, the smallest population is the least efficient from a square foot per student perspective. Had the pre-K-5 not included the oversized gymnasium, where the other two models didn't include an oversized gymnasium, had we matched the other models, that gross square foot would have been down around 185 square foot per student and would have been the most efficient of the three models. Any questions about?
Sorry, can you state that one more time? The pre-K through 5 is the most efficient?
No, least efficient.
Least efficient.
So,
Because of the full size.
No, she's right, pre-K-5. Pre-K-5 is the most efficient.
yeah, didn't you say pre-KK?
No, she said
Oh,
pre-K-5.
I'm sorry, pre-K-5, yes, is the most efficient.
Yeah, that's
My
what I
apologies,
thought.
yes.
That's what I hoped for. I already have myself at voting day.
Considering 3 gyms, 3 cafeterias, 3 everything in the
Right.
existing.
Correct.
Where the new one has one gym, one. So when you look at square footage, that's a little deceiving in that sense, because you're not, it is 138,000, but if you took out the 2 gyms you're not going to have because of in the proposed, you only have the 1 gym, or the 2 cafeterias, you're not going to, so that 138 could really be 125, or whatever the square footage is, because you're not counting those common areas they're not bringing over.
Well, that's all our 3 schools, right?
That's
The
all,
one-
yes,
that's
138, 614.
Presently, the 138
Yeah,
is
but I'm
ours.
saying, when you're thinking 138 to 167, it really isn't apples to apples, because the new school's not going to have 3 libraries, 3 gyms.
That is absolutely true, Dennis. However, your existing buildings
Yeah.
don't have all of the instructional space
Okay.
that you need to meet the needs of your students, and that's the primary reason why the proposed number is larger than what you have existing, because so many spaces are either inappropriate or are actually missing from your existing buildings.
Just on size-wise, I know our middle school is almost 150,000 square feet. So at 167, this school would be bigger than the middle school, correct?
That's correct.
How many floors? I would assume 3?
It depends on the site.
Right.
There's a real possibility that the concepts that we develop will need to be 3 stories depending on the site, but we wouldn't expect to need to go any higher than that.
That's a big school.
It is.
And the students are housed in the middle school or
Middle
max
school.
capacity?
Right now, current enrollment, including the pre-K, is 631. That school was built for about 950 students.
950. What's our pre-K through 5?
So if you add pre-K and the other grade levels, the capacities are around 855.
Okay. So
But
less
certainly,
students, but
you know,
better
and that's
space.
that's impossible to make an apple-to-apple comparison between,
Totally.
between middle school programming and elementary. There's so
I'm
many
just saying the
variations.
footprint
so-
of the building.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, right.
Yep.
And in terms of these gross square foot per student numbers, because of the specific programs here, this is on the high end of the range that we see across the entire Commonwealth, but it is still in the window of what we see across other elementary school examples. And we have some data that we could share if you felt the need to see that.
I won't go into great detail. I mean, we can, not tonight or a future time, but one of the, it does come, a lot of the square footage is associated with our pre-K programming and the more intensive special education programming. And sort of one level lower to that to drill down is some of the challenges as a district right now that we're grappling with the inefficient size of the Boutwell. And hence, because of that, we have deliberately, if I can use the term, stacked additional programs on the Wildwood side, with the Wildwood. So it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of just sort of splitting the district, if you will, in half and saying there should be an equal distribution of these programs. And again, happy to go into more detail, perhaps at a future meeting, to give this committee a closer sense of that. But one of the things that we talked extensively as a team about this is it would seem to us that with this opportunity to build appropriate space for our most in-need students, specifically in some of the sub-separate programs, it would be a lost opportunity to sort of do what we do right now and have done historically, and that is, at a 20,000-foot view, we've, because of space limitations in the Boutwell, we have taken a subset of our population from across town, started them at the Wildwood, when the Wildwood was functioning as it is right now, and then after their first couple of years, moved them to the other side of town. We don't think that that's a great idea for lots of reasons, and so hence that's part of the consideration in planning the space that leads to additional pre-K space and so on. So I think it's an important piece to put into context, and again, perhaps at a future meeting we could share that with you so you have a deeper understanding. We can lay it out in a way that you can understand the programs and such and see it, and I think it'll make more sense. Tonight we're not intended to do that, but we can do that.
So I'll just flash this up here. This is sort of an unofficial document. It's always dangerous when you do this, right? What we did in anticipation of this question was we went out and compiled 5 years worth of elementary school data from the MSBA. So what's across the top rows are 5 years worth of projects for anything the MSBA designates as elementary school. And what we did was we calculated the gross square foot for that particular project, and then we averaged them, identified the range for them so that we could report back on how this project falls relative to those other projects. So I'll start down here. The gross square foot per student range for this 5 years worth of data is 137 gross square feet per kid to 237. And you can imagine why that range is so wide. It depends extensively on what exactly a district is doing educationally and what kind of programs and services they're providing. The enrollment range also is a huge spectrum, right? 315 students on the small end to 1,020 students on the other end, and all manner of grade configurations. Some of them are even 2-grade freestanding schools. And then here's where this project falls. If you were to average all of those square foot per student for all of these projects, you would get 187 square feet per kid. If you were to only identify the ones that have pre-K in them, because remember, pre-K is not part of the MSBA guidelines, and therefore there are more kids being served than the space summary template would suggest, that number goes up a little bit to 191 square feet per student. And so, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, this project is currently 196 gross square feet per child, which is a little bit above that average, but still well within the sort of window of what other folks are doing. Yes.
Is the average up there for MSBA what they came and recommended?
No, this is what was actually executed.
Executed in the plans, or what MSBA?
No, what was built.
Okay,
What was built.
what was built, but do you have the guidelines of what MSBA came in at?
No, the
What they gave you?
the MSBA doesn't report in their record keeping what the MSBA guidelines said that project should be. They only report what the final project outcome was.
Because many times it is a case.
I was going to say, there's a lot of data on the MSBA's website that you can research and find, projects from 2014 forward. And it was great that Jason, I was looking at this myself yesterday, so great to see that, he's put something together just to kind of give you guys an idea on that and where we fall. But if you ever have an opportunity, Marianne, I know you looked on the website the other day, there's so much data on there and broken out by elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. So it's not all lumped into one. It's easier to kind of decipher.
Plus, what I was also going to add is that every district is so uniquely different in how they deliver their educational program that it's not a fair comparison to say apples to apples, everybody needs to do this. It becomes more down to the PDP and beyond on what justification you can make for the spaces, on whether they be considered eligible or not.
And one last question. When I get into averages, and sometimes we do this in other ways in our office, and I find sometimes the median is meaningful because sometimes there's the outliers that skew the average. I wondered if there were did you note that there were outliers that screwed the average, or was the median, I guess, meaningful, or did we look at that? Because
we didn't.
I'm sorry, but it's just.
I was a math teacher. I love nerding out on statistics. We did not sequence these in order so that we could identify the median square footage. But we tried to use this bar graph to represent sort of how many projects were over the line versus under the line, and how far over the line. And I don't know, just a quick eye sweep. This doesn't look like there's any significant outliers here that have skewed this data in one direction or the other. We have some that are. I keep losing my mouse. Some that are unusually low. It didn't run a standard deviation on any of this, right?
Yeah, no, I know, and I wasn't going to go there.
I think what's important for the design team and the process that we're all going to follow, we're going to create our concepts based on what's been developed in terms of the space summary so far, but we all acknowledge and recognize that square feet equals dollars. And so in the next step, in the PSR step, once we have one round of cost estimates in our hands, we may need to go through a prioritization process that says, yes, these spaces are in the project right now, but are they need to haves or are they nice to haves? Could we keep them all and make them all just a little bit smaller? We can go through that process early in that what's called the PSR phase, preferred schematic report phase, if in fact that's deemed necessary. Any questions about that?
Thank you.
All right, so transitioning then into the guiding principles for design. We sent this document out ahead of the rest of the presentation. It's a little bit wordy, but we wanted to offer this group an opportunity to have a discussion about this, and hopefully folks have had a chance to look over this at least briefly. Many of the things in here are educationally related, right? they're narrative versions of the overall building diagrams, for example. They are going to be the things that the design team continues to refer back to as design progresses. There are a few things on here based on operations. We had a really nice meeting with George Hooper and Dennis a few days ago, so we actually added some additional bullets to the list of guiding principles for design. A few things to note. I won't go through every single bullet here. A few things to note. One of the guiding principles is focused on a new STEM program at the elementary level and providing space for that. Ultimately, that will be a school committee decision, but we're planning for that even in these early concepts. Any thoughts or feedback on this list of guiding principles? We're certainly willing to add items to this. In fact, we're expecting to add some based on the work of a sustainability working group that's going to start meeting here soon.
I think it's just important to point out that the bulk of these originated from the feedback through the visioning sessions. You mentioned, conversation with George Hooper recently to add to some of this, but the bulk of this, the foundation of this did start from that visioning session, which again, as a reminder, included a whole lot of folks from all of the stakeholders across our community, parent, guardians, students, school leaders, educators, and so on. So thank you for pulling it together. And as we talked about this, it's all important information, but this we think is very important, and we want this committee as a whole to both buy in and support ultimately these principles, because as this project moves forward, undoubtedly we're going to have to keep coming back to this if and as there are some changes that have to happen, adjustments, and so on. So definitely, if you have thoughts, comments, definitely value those this evening.
So I was very happy to see probably what Dennis and George added third from the bottom about prioritizing durability and ease of maintenance over first cost. Operational cost is going to be a huge item long-term for the town, and the first cost might seem expensive, but in time, the operational cost can be a lot more.
Any other feedback or thoughts on this? Additions, edits? Does it feel okay to move forward with in this first step, knowing that we can revisit this at any time? See some heads going up and down. That's good.
Can you go back up one slide, please? Thank you.
I do want to add one question here. When we were reading through these, there seemed to be an absence of site amenities. So if there's any site criteria that is really important that we as a design team and we as a community want to make sure become part of this project, that it might be a good time to discuss that and maybe potentially add that to the guiding principles. And I only bring that up because the guiding principles, as we move forward, will eventually lead us to how we evaluate each concept that we bring forward, and it'll help us to narrow down. And, some of the sites, there are going to be compromises depending on the size of the building that is placed on that site. And so, if a certain amount of parking, or if certain fields, or, proximity to a bus stop, whatever that may be, having some thought on that, it is a good time to potentially add that to the guiding principles. And like I said, it would eventually become part of the criteria to evaluate the concepts. So.
I have a question kind of leading based off of that comment. Thank you for that. Because in my experience, it has always been an oversight on the CARES program and the site utilization they have with the amenities such as swings and all of the play area, on what proximity they need to their entrance area, as well as what type of swings they need to make sure that they're accommodating their student population as well that's utilizing the school. And in fact, in addition to that is the special education program. They might have specific needs for swings that are different than the general population, to make sure to account for those too.
Yeah. It's all coming.
With respect to the second to last bullet on the left, separation of site circulation, I'm assuming that's really getting to the flow of traffic, and I guess I might be taking too deep of a dive. What comes to mind for me is similar to the high school, you have a path for buses or for drop-off. But I think when it comes to if, say, town hall site becomes of consideration, the last thing you want is a backup on Glen Road. So something where we incorporate wrapping around the entire area where you're maximizing the amount of cars that can sit on the property as drop-off happens, and you're really eliminating how many people can sit on the main road. Something like
Yeah,
that.
it's a terrific point, and it's a nuance that's not in this list yet, the idea of maximizing the queuing length for parent vehicles, and perhaps something that should be
Thank you.
added to the list.
More eloquently stated. Thank you.
It's quite common for us to attempt to do that, and sites unfortunately will dictate. As we start to develop concepts, that's one of the things that we'll often evaluate the site features against is how well it achieves separation of vehicles and the ability to keep cars from backing up onto local streets. So we'll certainly add that to this a list of guiding principles, the idea of maximizing the queue length, particularly around pickup time, because that's when grandparents show up an hour before the end of school and the backup starts to occur.
Susan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had one thing, and I may be taking too deep a dive too, but the cafeteria in such a way to create a variety of dining experiences in smaller zones to reduce student anxiety. The only thing that comes to mind there, and I'm not a teacher, so I can be corrected by all of you who spend your time in the school, I just wonder from a sightline perspective or an oversight perspective, minimizing the need for the oversight from adults, if you're having too many separate spaces without sightlines.
Well, it's a terrific observation. We have had, Dorn Whittier has had some success in zoning cafeterias in such a way that you can actually have both features. In fact, in the program, we have 3 what we call quiet cafes, not too dissimilar from what you have here at the high school. And you could position those in such a way that they could still be fully supervised by a single adult standing in one place. We have a middle school example where the ceiling height changes in one part of the cafeteria that is a rectangle, and therefore the acoustical properties in that moment are very different than elsewhere. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So as a design solution emerges, we'll be thinking about all of those factors and trying to manage them all simultaneously so that you don't have to have 2 people sort of observe 2 different areas of a cafeteria.
Thank you.
But a great observation.
Talking about like the cafeteria area, when you look at the caf here, and Glenn and Paul and Ryan would have a better idea, but I don't see them used as anything but an area for like a clique of kids or a group of kids, and they're all sitting on the counters or wherever, but it's not like we use them for breakout rooms or the quiet space. Seems like the quiet space for the kids were down the hallway and in separate desks, eating their lunch or whatever. So like those spaces I don't think get utilized to what it was created for. So it could be considered useless space, or maybe we should have a bigger cafeteria. And then in one of the pictures you had, don't look like a courtyard area, right? There's like a month at the beginning of the year and a month at the end of the year that I see people in the courtyard. The rest of the year, those doors are locked and you really don't get the benefit of it. So when you're thinking of square footage, it looks nice, but maintenance-wise for the DPW to get in there or whatever else, and then the usage of it, I just don't think you would get a lot out of that. So when you're thinking of that, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I have a key to use it and take the cut through to the library, but the kids don't because you're tracking in water and everything else.
Yeah, I think the image that you're referring to is one of the overall building diagramming exercise images where it looked like there was a courtyard in the middle.
Yeah.
I want to sort of assure you that we're not thinking courtyard at the moment. We know that they're hard to maintain. They have to be designed really thoughtfully in order to be used by classroom teachers, to be used by students if they're unsupervised, particularly in an elementary setting. So depending on the sites, that may be part of a solution, but the design team isn't currently thinking about enclosed courtyards similar to what you have here at the high school.
I don't see the value, like, it was a great idea and a concept, but I don't see the use that you get out of it on both of those. And that's just an outside person coming through.
It could be different by grade grouping. We do have another project where there are actually 2 courtyards, and the larger of the two is where pre-K play is going to occur, and they wanted that feature intentionally because they felt like it was a safety and security feature for those kids, that they could be out there, and the building itself was serving as the thing that was keeping them contained.
When the Wildwood shut down, pre-K was here, and that was probably the only time I really saw it heavily used. And they called it, all the kids were calling it free-range pre-K, because they'd all watch out the windows and you could see them running around.
Julie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to circle back on your comment about the breakout spaces, like a private small room in the cafeteria. Doran Whittier and SMA partnered on a project, and we all were able to tour it. And as Jason was saying, the way that the cafeteria is set up, it was set up almost like an L shape, so someone could stand in the middle. But there was a glassed-in private area for kids who had sensory issues, that those spaces were way too loud for them. And they told us that they are used on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
and it
I
definitely,
can believe it. I'm just saying what I see here isn't that.
and it definitely depends on the,
Utilized. But for the little kids, it's a must.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it's a
But I think it
difference.
depends on the community and how you roll the programs out. You know, I go to a lot of schools and I see, you know, Lunch Bunch use that area. So it's like a little group of people that they choose to do that. But I think in all of the schools that we looked at, they were heavily used.
Yeah,
I think
that's
so.
it.
And we were happy to see that they were
And they
using
were
that.
utilized in like, like, there was a main cafeteria, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
And then the corners were taken with those quieter rooms.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not here at high school, I was briefly, as you mentioned, but I think at the lower levels, it's different. Kids don't experience the same sense of peer vulnerability in that kind of situation. And we have specific programs who are teaching students to begin to integrate into a cafeteria setting, and those types of rooms would provide them access in a way that they don't have right now to begin to learn those skills, as well as those lunch bunches that run almost daily at all of the elementary schools.
And in order to make them more useful for other purposes, we're talking about perhaps there are folding partitions between these three rooms, so they could be used in a professional development setting, for example, or for larger groups at lunchtime. And the design team will overlay that sort of thinking on all of these spaces. How do we provide them with enough features that they can be multifunctional and not just serve that one single function that they were intended to? Yeah, David?
Can we talk just a little bit about, there are 2 points here about administrative offices. One says position some of them within classroom groupings, remainder of administrative spaces near the main entry. And, I mean, I can see an argument for having some administrators kind of more out integrated into the spaces rather than kind of segregated, but there's also administrative efficiencies that you get from having people easily accessible to you and in a central area. Can we just talk a little bit about?
Maybe I'll let the educators talk about how that particular concept was discussed and developed.
There was a lot of discussion about that in the organization. I think part of that discussion was about the sheer size of some of these buildings and the time it might take to get from point A to point B, and the logistics of that, having a building with multiple administrators, having just an access to one person within those kind of, I'll call them the wings, the academic wings, just seemed to make the most sense at the end of the day, while still having kind of a maid administrative suite closer to the front entrance.
So for example, who did you think about would be placed in the wings versus in the core suite?
Didn't put labels on anything.
Well, it was interesting, right? The one thing that stands out, when we were at one of the schools, it was a very big school, and the principal didn't like it, right? Because her main office was on the bottom floor, but there's 2 floors above her. So she said to us, she's like, listen, there's days I grab my laptop and I go up to one of the smaller closets, like it's like a smaller area. She goes, because I'm too far away. So, you know, there's a need for an administrator, you know, whatever the situation is, they've got to be closer, right? So they can't be housed, in my opinion, on that first floor when everything else is going on. Above them or below them. So she's literally said, I grab my stuff and I go, it's like she showed us, it's like a closet space, but who cares, right?
Right. Place to stand.
As a place to be.
So.
And that's in a school that opened like within the last
Yeah.
2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And they realized after, it was designed in the practical use of such a large building, because pretty sure that's one where there's 2 schools. And so they realized after they were in the building that it just didn't make sense, and they needed to be spread out a little bit more.
I think some of that conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of that conversation also came with, I think as you said, Kate, the uncertainty around the size of the school, the layout of the school, and also the realization that it's not all going to be a school likely operating in unison in terms of arrival time and dismissal. And with the pre-K, early childhood element, if there is offsetting times there, and it's a really expansive school that's not necessarily multi-floors, but really, I think there's consideration of what that might ultimately look like. So looking at the flexibility once that becomes more in focus around where perhaps the positioning of that support staff is
If I
located.
can ask a follow-on question to that. I mean, this also intersects with the administrative structure or the leadership structure
Right. Very
of
much.
the school.
Very much
Because
so.
I've seen schools where essentially you have 2 schools operating just separately within
Right.
one building. I've been in those programs where you essentially have, again, it's like one building, but different start times, and you actually have different administrative leadership, because there's a principal for the, one side, there's a principal for another wing on the other side. And that's obviously going to also affect how you're structuring your layout.
And so,
I have a question. Sorry, apologize for coming late. I was at another town hall school administration meeting, and I won't interject too much because I know you're far beyond. But the point I would bring up is security. So if you're going to have administrative offices in different areas, I'm assuming parents, are you going to just allow them to walk through the halls to get to an administrative office on the second floor or the furthest section away? Are you going to have them escorted? I think security, as you all realize more than I, is of the utmost importance. So if you're going to have administrative offices scattered throughout a building rather than in one location, how does that
I
work?
think the intent was that to have the administration wing centrally located past the entrance point where the parents would come. These additional administration areas would be a smaller touch point for the principal if she is or he is on the 3rd floor, for example, but needs to access a computer or a printer or somewhere to have a one-on-one private meeting with another teacher. It wasn't necessarily the way it appears. It wasn't necessarily that that's where their office will be. It's just an additional location that they can utilize for their need.
But I think it's clear, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think the idea was not that families would be venturing deeper into the school to meet with administration, that administrators, should they need to, could access a conference room or meeting space in the administrative suite. But we also discussed that in the event of emergency, it would be quite beneficial to have administrators located with students and not all centrally located in one spot close to the front door. So that again, should there be a situation in which there was a lockdown or students needed access to, or teachers needed access to administrators, they were already in those locations rather than.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the first thing that popped up is security.
And I think, and absolutely, and I think certainly security, I know, has been and of course will be a focal point of the design of this, and this facility will have certainly locked entrances like we do right now in all of our schools. Again, not knowing what this building looks like, and again, the reality of pre-K or the early childhood, we don't know, it may emerge that there's a different point of entry, a secured entry point perhaps for the pre-K. That obviously would have appropriate staff and personnel there. There may be a different entry point locked and secured for the rest of the population of the school. So all of that intersects with, the placement of these, the personnel, and just their accessibility to support all of our operations.
the discussion has been really thoughtful, and maybe this particular moment is a good time to bridge into the next steps. Because one of those key next steps that the design team is taking is to develop these early concepts. This is a sample, this is not Wilmington, right? We want to make that clear to everyone. The reason we're showing it is to sort of set expectations around what the level of design detail will be at this step. And so all of those sort of pieces and parts that you saw on previous slides The design team is going to arrange those based on the guiding principles, based on the overall building diagramming, onto the respective sites that are under consideration. We're going to try to plan out parking and site circulation and sidewalks and playgrounds and fields and test fit whether or not those things can fit the way we want them to fit on the sites that we have available to us. So each concept will have a site plan associated with it, like you're seeing in the right-hand illustration, and every floor will be articulated. So you'll sort of have a sense of where every space in the project is located geographically, what it's next to, what floor it's on, how it relates to elements on the outside, and then you'll have a site plan that will help you understand how much queue length there is. For example, in this project, the front door, get my mouse here. The front door is right here, and in the afternoon, the first car will be parked here, and they have this entire length before you get to the road. 70 vehicles can stack in that queue in the afternoon. And so that was our attempt in that particular project to maximize the queue length for the afternoon drop-off. But you'll see these kinds of illustrations starting in January for you to weigh in on how we've accomplished the things that you've asked us to accomplish. Any questions about those particular illustrations? We're going to do at least one round of feedback with the extended leadership working group to make sure that the pieces and parts are in the right locations. But ultimately, we'll send these off to the cost estimator in February. And then you'll start to see not only the illustrations, but the estimates for them later in the spring.
What is our next community engagement opportunity?
That's a great question. We were talking about that the other day, and we were gauging the end of January, beginning of February, most likely probably towards the end of January. And we were kind of discussing whether or not we do another virtual or we do an in-person. The virtual, I thought, was pretty successful. There was a lot of participants. And at this stage, I don't think it could hurt for us to do another virtual one. As we get a little further along, it is nice to see people in person, let the kids come, with them. They come up, they look at it, they ask all kinds of questions. We actually encourage the children to ask questions about what they see, what they want, and we take their feedback. So.
Could we do both? That's what I was.
Could we do a virtual and in person?
Simultaneously.
Oh, like a hybrid?
Yeah.
It's difficult to do it that way. We did successfully execute some hybrid visioning sessions, but it is more challenging, particularly for folks at home, to feel like they're actively participating in the discussion. We could certainly talk about it and see what the possibilities are.
Can I ask a question? Sorry to go back a little bit to
Yes.
the guiding principles.
Yes.
I'm not from Wilmington, I don't live in Wilmington, and I'm fairly new to the educational system here, but one of the things that I think I've seen to be important is access to green field space for outdoor play, and I don't see that delineated here.
Terrific.
So I don't know that that's something, if that's just my observation, but.
And are you making that request strictly from an educational point of view or from a recreational point of view, or both?
I would say probably both, but I think at every space that I have been to, and I have been to many at this point, during any kind of recess or outdoor play, students are not only utilizing a play structure, but also the green field space around it.
So would that take the form of something like provide open green space to the greatest extent possible, something like that, or look for opportunities to provide open play and recreational space, something like that?
I think the site's going to determine pretty much what.
I thought the same thing. I
Yeah.
think the amount of green space that you need for the kids during the day, but from a recreational perspective, the larger the school we build, the more properties we could turn into other dedicated
Right.
recreational spaces.
Right.
It's, if I may, it is something that I've raised with the temporary town manager around the need to have a parallel path pretty quickly. I think it seems underway here to explore building reuse or what's the term?
Site reuse.
So as to inform an understanding of the community around if in fact school, whatever option is ultimately pursued, what is the disposition of the remaining school sites, and what would be the intent of the town in terms of, hypothetically perhaps if there's a building that a current building location that's going to no longer be in use, will that site be used for recreational fields or whatever?
Right.
Undoubtedly, there will be a point in time in which I would imagine very strongly the community at large is going to want to understand that, not just from a possible economic standpoint on the town side, but certainly from a space and filled recreation standpoint.
Yeah.
I think that will be really important. So
It's going to be a big bone of contention, if you will. If town hall becomes a legitimate option for us, that's 4 ball fields back there that could potentially be consumed.
So let's talk about exactly that.
I'm not a big fan of the town hall site. I mean, it's not.
This matrix represents the full range of options that the design team needs to think about. You'll see the different grade configurations across the top and the different sites under consideration. It's important to note that the MSBA does have expectations about what the minimum due diligence is. And in terms of this matrix, you can think about the minimum due diligence sort of being the diagonal, that we have to explore repair, ad reno, and new for each one of the grade configurations at each one of their respective sites. There are some combinations that don't make sense to explore at all. Things like the pre-K at Woburn Street, because Woburn Street is going to still have to exist in that particular grade configuration. That's true for North Intermediate also. And then similarly, trying to explore pre-K3 at the North Intermediate site, right? North is going to have to remain in existence, and so you would actually have 2 separate schools on that site, so it doesn't make any sense to explore that as a scenario. But you'll notice that down here for the town hall row, it's still a question, and we're looking for some feedback from you. Before you render an opinion or thoughts on that, let me say that our early explorations have demonstrated that the pre-K5 model appears to be able to fit as an all-new building on the North Intermediate site, even while North continues to be occupied during construction. And so if that particular site can accommodate that, is there really a desire to explore an all-new building on the town hall site?
Yeah, I just want to chime in a bit. I'm not in favor of the town hall site. I would be more inclined to go with the North Intermediate site. I don't even know where the town hall site came into this project or who even brought it forward at this point. But there are some things going on over there that there's Article 97 land there.
Sure.
There's a park that's designated as a park over there, the Robert Palmer Park, with someone mentioned 4 ball fields. So there's, there's some challenges that you may not know at this point. So I'd be inclined to the North Intermediate.
So just to provide a little bit of context, the potential for exploring something on the town hall site came up over the summer, and it came up in response to, well, what if it doesn't fit anywhere? Then what do we do? And so now we've done a little bit of design work, enough to at least be confident in our own minds that something could be executed on at least one of the other existing sites, that perhaps it may not be necessary to explore the town hall site unless there's a compelling desire to do so.
I mean, Glen Road, trying to fit all those school buses coming in, I just can't see that. It's just a disaster.
Yeah, Dennis?
So keep in mind, and the town hall site doesn't have sewers, the town hall site doesn't have natural gas. The North Intermediate has both of those. The Shawshene School has both of those. Both have big fields. Those are the only 2 places, on my mind, that you could actually fit something that big that already has some of the services to it. Because you're not going to want to do septic systems. You don't want to. So you want the sewage, and that's going to be the North Intermediate field. And I know the North Intermediate field gets used for, I think, soccer and some other sports during the year. So when you start building there and lose that field, that's going to go somewhere else too. But I think that's really the spot that you could build a new school that fits all the needs. The Woburn Street site does have a lot of ledge that we can see. That means that you go to start building on that site, you could run into a lot of issues with blasting and everything else, trying to get through that ledge, because what we can see is already a lot.
Yeah, and so in terms of our process, as I mentioned, the MSBA has a certain set of expectations around due diligence, and we have an obligation to test a new pre-K3 on the Woburn Street site, despite all of those constraints that you just mentioned. And when we go to evaluate them at the end of this first phase, this first PDP phase, all of those things should come into consideration. We don't have the right queue length, we don't have any ball fields, we don't have any utilities, right? And, you know, it will be reasons to eliminate options from continuing forward, but we still have a responsibility to explore a certain number of options as part of the MSBA's expectation.
So basically, we can expect to see 9 scenarios, 9 plans is basically how it's gonna.
There's a lot more right now.
Every bullet is a different
Oh,
option.
right. Yes.
But that being said, for example, with Town Hall, if this group says, we don't think at this point, knowing that we can fit a pre-K5 on one of the other sites, do we even explore it, right?
But that still has to be developed come January, right?
It does not, no.
Not that one.
Only if this group desires it to be developed, then we would develop it as an option to be considered. That being said, it is not required by MSBA to do that. Similarly, such as like an ad reno at Wildwood for pre-K5. Like, MSBA is not telling us we have to do that. The only thing at Wildwood that we have to do is the repair, the ad reno, and the new for pre-KK, because that is where Wildwood is. So so that's where Jason was saying on the diagonal, those are kind of the requirements that we have to do for Wildwood, Woburn, and North. The other boxes that have the bullets in them are options that are here for consideration. If this group were to say, we would never consider that as an option, why are we wasting our time, for example, then we could potentially eliminate that right now and not have to develop a concept for consideration to move forward.
One of the realities that at least has been answered at the outset that I know these folks know very well happens to other communities where you have a preferred site, but you can't build a new school while you're still operating a school in existence. And then you have to get in a whole other layer of complications around modular space or swing space or extended construction time period, which obviously all elevates the cost. Knowing there's at least one option, it sounds like, that in fact construction can happen is a revelation in the sense of, again, back to the town hall. It doesn't sound like, and I think that town hall, if I recall, did emerge as, well, what if? And I also share your concerns. I mean, even if the site can accommodate the building, I can't imagine the volume of traffic down Glen Road with school buses and cars and staff. I can't. That hasn't been studied, but I can't imagine that wouldn't be a significant problem. So.
However, it's very close to a major thoroughfare. So personally, I would like to see, for the reasons of it is land that can be built on without disturbing the existing buildings, that's a reason enough, I think, to include exploring it.
And I don't necessarily agree. I just don't think it's an option, and I would hate to have Durham Whittier spin their wheels if we can get this on another site.
Are we certain that we could get the larger of the schools on the North Intermediate with maintaining the existing school in operation during construction?
We have an illustration under development that suggests that yes, in fact, that is a possibility, where we could build a 3-story new building free and clear of the existing building, have it remain in operation during construction.
But is that the optimal location where we would put the school? Are we kind of looking at it as, here is the site for the North Intermediate, this is the only space we have available to build upon, so this is where the site is going to be, versus if it was a vacant site, where would you place it?
We'll show it to you next month, and you can tell us how we did.
Yeah.
I guess that's, for example, so because the Wildwood's not in use, for the ad rental or new option, do we know if that site can handle larger schools?
Everybody wants to get right to the end.
You said initial concept, if it doesn't fit at all, let's not look at it. But if it's possible, we should look at it because it's a site that is not an active school.
Site.
So I'll try to make this analogy without sort of giving away what we're working on. You think about a donut, right? At North Intermediate, the building can fit in a donut hole. At Wildwood, that same building is the donut hole. And so, yes, maybe a building could technically be built there, but satisfying all of the other requirements will likely either come with significant compromises or they wouldn't exist at all.
And if you think of the Wildwood, that's a cut-through. Glen Road's a cut-through. So there's a ton of traffic that has nothing to do with schools that are going down those roads every day. So to me, though, that helps rule that out, because when you add the buses and the parents and everyone else, those are already cut-throughs for everyone from Tewksbury and everywhere else. So I think that rules them out, in my opinion.
Obviously, all of you know all of these sites way better than the design team does, and I've already formed opinions.
So the other part with the town hall site too, I think you might have a lot of pushback from the community, because that's not over on that side of town. It's more of a central location, and I think you might have a little bit of pushback from the community on that.
Okay.
Just a follow-up as to what you said, are you saying the Wildwood is not in play? Because I think it should be in play, because it's a vacant building. If you're looking to build without disturbing classes, that would be a place to build.
Yes, it is in play and it will be considered, but based on our early explorations, at least for the pre-K 5, the largest population under consideration, it's unlikely that that's going to be a viable site for that one population.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm a big fan of a pre-K to 5 personally, but that I'm not, but I see an X where it says pre-K to 3 at the North Intermediate. Are you not going to show design for a pre-K to 3?
The reason there's an X there is because if we were to execute that idea, there would actually be 2 completely independent schools on that property, because the North Intermediate would still have to exist as a 4-5 school and have something new to serve pre-K 3 on the same site. Unlike the pre-K 5, where the existing North could be demolished, for example, because those students are being accommodated in the new project.
So in other words, for a pre-K 3 to be built at North, it would become a campus, but without the advantage of having a fully planned out campus with 2 buildings on it, because one is existing, so you have to work around the existing conditions to make it work, which we potentially would not work.
So, Julie, I don't want to overstep here, but maybe in terms of process, we should put something on the agenda for the next school building committee for them to render an official opinion about the town hall site, whether to explore it or not.
That's a good idea.
And if it comes off, we just won't include that in our work moving forward.
So our next meeting is scheduled, by the way, for January 10th. Just want to put that on record so that we have attendance and we can.
Is there anything else relative to item number 9, schedule update? Am I jumping ahead, or are you good here for this, Jason? Or, sorry.
I'm all set with this part of the presentation, unless there are any more questions or comments about the potential range of options that we're going to explore.
I have a question. So on January 10th, when we're going to evaluate the town hall location, would we be able to identify some of the utilities that are not available, so that way, I think that's a major consideration. That's a deterrent.
We definitely can. We have, we do have information on all of the site amenities and utilities that are either available or not for a town hall site. The other thing, as Mr. Kyra mentioned, is there's definitely some stipulations with the town hall site. For example, depending on how far the Article 97 line falls into the actual town hall site versus the adjacent property, that can impact the requirements of being able to even utilize that site. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Article 97, it takes the legislature to vote on it. So it can potentially severely delay the schedule of this project if that were in fact the case. So I've actually been working with the town engineer to gather some information. And so they're working on putting that together for us. So we just don't have clarification on it right now, which is why we haven't presented it.
Which legislature needs to vote on it?
State.
Town.
The
State.
Massachusetts
Yeah,
legislature.
it's to the state level.
Was that-
Just
And it's
to make
an act of the state to get.
And just to put it out there as well, we have a rink committee in town, and they've been looking at that site as well, and we're in the same situation with the Article 97 tower. So there's that out there as well, just so that the committee here knows that, to build a new hockey rink for the town.
Yes, David?
I would clarify something about what we were saying about whether you explore like a pre-K through 3 at the North Intermediate site. And I totally understand the point that if it's only a K through or pre-K through 3 building, then we still need another building serving grade 4 and 5. But we still would have another building, which would be Woburn Street, which wouldn't be needed anymore after a new school opens. So that, I mean, wouldn't that be a possibility that the new K through 3
it's a
goes up
terrific
in north,
idea,
and
but it
then-
gets really tricky, and I'll tell you why. So in that scenario, because the Woburn Street population is the subject of that pre-K 3 grade configuration, you would essentially be saying to the MSBA, this building is not good enough for pre-K through 3, but it is good enough for grades 4 through 5.
Yeah.
And so it would be very unlikely that the MSBA would allow you to do that kind of switch, where you could build a pre-K 3 at the north, knock the north down, move the north kids into a building that you're abandoning in order to build a new one. Does that make sense?
I mean, in some way, yes. I mean, it's.
But we wouldn't be abandoning it if we're putting the other grades over there.
Right, but from the MSBA's perspective, right, the problem you're trying to solve is that the Woburn Street is inadequate for children. And so therefore you're building a new one over at the north.
Well, let's
Site.
not go there, because I don't want the residents to believe that the Woburn Street is not a good school. You know, I think it's a pretty good school, and I think it's in pretty good shape. I don't want there to be a perception out there that, you know, this is bad, when it's not, right?
Fair enough, but if it was adequate for this population, then a solution at that site would be the focus. And so this idea of moving kids out of one building, building them a new building, and then moving other kids into this building, I would.
In case you're going to renovate that building as part of that cycling around, that it allows you to do more intensive renovations.
Yes, but not part of the MSBA project.
Yeah, and I'm not in favor of that, but I did want to understand, and I do understand a little
Yep.
bit better now, like kind of the slightly sometimes convoluted MSBA maze that we have to go through the obstacle course.
Now you could explore a pre-K 3 addition at the north, but we wouldn't consider that where that X is. We would consider that over there where the pre-K 5 is, because that's
Right, that's an
the
ad
population
reno-
that would
that's
be
an
in
ad
that
reno.
building, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that concludes my part of the presentation, and just so we're all on the same page, what Doran Whittier is going to do is we're going to start to pursue options related to what's up here on the screen. We are going to hold off on developing options at the town hall site until we can present some more information and you can render an opinion about that. In our next couple of school building committee meetings, it's unlikely that we're going to have all 15, or if we develop different flavors of some of these, all of them in just one meeting. So you may be seeing concepts emerge and get presented over the next couple of school building committee meetings, and then conversations happening alongside all of that.
Which, if that is the case, we may need to request that a meeting is added to the schedule, so as not to delay the project, because if the reality is by mid-February, we really should be going to the estimator with any of the concepts that we need to price
So for with this that, PDP phase. I think that it may not be that we may need one. We are going to need an additional meeting.
And
There's
how
no
many
way
do
for
we
us-
anticipate going to the estimator with?
So-
All of them?
So
Oh, okay.
any bullet here that we develop must go to the estimator and be part of the PDP submission. And so they all will have to be developed to the same level. At the end of PDP, part of what we're going to do is create an evaluation criteria and be able to start shortlisting out of the options here, which ones we want to try to move forward into the next phase.
And just to set expectations around that, the MSBA will require us to continue with all 3 grade configurations, right, into the short list, at least one option from each one of the 3 grade configurations. And then at least one of repair, add reno, or new. Doesn't have to be one of each for each grade configuration, but at least one of those across the spectrum of short list. So we just want to sort of set the table for that we can't start eliminating grade configurations in this first step. That doesn't happen until the second step when we submit the preferred schematic report.
And I'd also like to add, with each of these concepts that we're developing, a lot of it is really truth testing that the size of this building will fit on the site and whether it would be 1 story versus 2 or 3, how the circulation would work. So when we're developing these, it's really about a matter of truth testing versus the specific design. That'll happen later on. So, just to put it out there that when we come back with these conceptual options, that's not necessarily what the building will, the detail of the building. There's still many phases to develop all of those details and make changes as needed.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. Thanks, Jason, so much. Thanks for the questions. Moving to item number 9, schedule update. Julie, was that something you had?
That was kind of, we were combining
Okay.
next steps with schedule update.
Okay.
And can I ask a schedule question? If we're planning the next SBC on January 10th, and you mentioned the public forum or community outreach sometime in February, I'm assuming that will be, or end of January, that would be prior to the cost estimating that we have. Are we anticipating doing another community outreach after the cost estimates are back?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So at some point, we'll, present the options to the community, and then we'll come back with the cost estimates that are related to it.
Okay.
And the reason we like that process is it gives the members of the community an opportunity to weigh in on whatever the design is at that moment, and we can make adjustments based on that, and rather than just, here they are, aren't they great, sort of process.
No, agreed.
And I think also as part of that process, we'll also look at gauging the community's interest in certain options, because that
Right.
will help guide what this group is moving forward with.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 10, Wildwood School Building Committee Public Relations Working Group updates.
So I'll give that update. We have had an initial contact and a meeting, but not a full official meeting per se. We're waiting for the January timeframe to fully engage. But in the meantime, we have asked SMMA, as in Doran Whittier, to create a public forum kind of pamphlet or a poster that for all upcoming activities in the community, that school plays, performances, that we could put the poster up with a QR code as well to invite members of the community that are passing through to go to the performances, be able to have a place visually that they can see about the project, as well as a code and an email address for them to ask questions and inquire a little bit more about the project, just in hopes of rounding more community engagement that way.
Will the posters change over time?
This poster is just meant for the initial inception, that it just to kind of, again, a precursor to the February, end of January timeframe for the community outreach, to make sure that at least the message of what was delivered on the first community outreach has been communicated to a broader audience than those that attended the initial meeting, in hopes of garnering some more support and interest that the second community forum, we might have a larger attendance.
Can we put put one at the library and maybe one at the senior center and
Yeah.
town hall?
Great idea. Yeah.
And Christine, these will evolve over time. So you'll see a series of them, and as the project comes on further along and conceptual designs are created, the posters will be changed out and updated.
Right, this isn't meant to be a stagnant poster, it's just the initial inception of it, where we are right now. This is what information was delivered to the public. Get to learn a little bit more, and please join us and get involved.
Correct, that we have a virtual version
we can include it in our principal letters. Yeah, on our side.
Both sides.
Okay, thank you for that. You're good, Vivian, with that? Okay, great. I'd like to, if I could go just out of order, jump back to the very beginning of the meeting. We did not take care of 2 actionable items that, with now a full quorum, I'd like to do. Item number 2, approval of minutes from our last meeting, looking for approval of those, but there was a note for a edit, so should we hold on those and come back at the next meeting?
No, we could
No.
make an
Okay.
I could make a motion to approve the meeting minutes with the annotation noted earlier.
Second.
Thank you. And roll call.
Roll call, Paul?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
Dennis?
I wasn't at the meeting, so I don't know if I should vote on.
Abstain. And myself, yes.
Great. Thank you. Item number 3, the approval of invoices. Julie, did you want to speak to that?
I do.
Please.
Prior to this meeting, we met with the Finance Working Group to review warrant article number 6. This includes SMMA's invoice for the month of November in the amount of $7,500. In addition to that, Doran Whittier Architects, November invoice in the amount of $31,500. And Doran Whittier Architects invoice for hazardous materials in the amount of $7,920. Total amount of warrant article number 6 is $46,920. And Susan Inman will make the recommendation.
The Finance Working Group has reviewed all of the invoices and makes a motion to move them forward for payment
Second.
for warrant 6.
Just a question, what's the hazardous waste?
Testing for all.
So part of the existing condition studies that we did, we had our consultant that goes through the buildings to assess what hazardous materials, what's considered hazardous materials, if there are any, are in the building. So they'll go through and put a
That
report
was done.
together and then put an estimate together for when we eventually go to construction. But we need that number as part of the estimate for any concept.
Thank you.
Great. So
Roll
roll
call?
call, please. Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, thanks for your flexibility. Jumping back down to the end of the, or towards the end of the agenda. Item number 11, discussion, correspondence, new items.
Also as part of the Finance Working Group today, we discussed the overall budget. Remaining in our uncommitted costs is $161,080. That's out of your $1,200,000 budget. What we have talked about tonight is about marketing material for the senior center, the library, and some school activities. What we had discussed in a leadership meeting was that potentially asking the committee to allocate a allowance of $5,000 to be able to print marketing material. And that would be at the discretion, obviously, of the Finance Working Group. We would present them with invoices, and they would be reviewed as part of those meetings. So I would just like to bring that up for consideration with the committee. If that money isn't spent, obviously, it gets returned.
Where is the money coming from out of the $1 million budget?
Your current budget is $1,200,000. We've encumbered Doran Whittier's fee and SMMA's fee, and so there's remaining to be encumbered $161,080. So we would take $5,000 out of that and put it into a line item called printing, and we can utilize that money that way.
Can you give it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can give a little bit of more explanation. It was an idea approached since we didn't have a specific line item or a fund and a means to utilize to print some of these posters and create some of these visual graphics in order to engage the community and have a distribution. We thought that since there is some available funds that have not already been committed or allocated towards anything, if we could use 5,000 of that towards the printing of these posters to be placed at the library, the school, the town hall, and at the auditorium for where parents come in and out. As Julie mentioned, if it doesn't get used, if we don't utilize all of it, it's still our money to reallocate where we'd like.
Do you need a motion to do that line
Yes.
item?
Yes, since it becomes a shift in where the
the budget.
dollars go.
All right, I'll make the motion to move 5,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other further questions or discussions before roll call? Seeing none. Paul?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Yes.
Dennis? Dr. Brand?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Thank you. Other discussion, correspondence, or new items this evening?
Actually, just one quick point of order. Did we solve the Dennis sworn in?
Yeah, I got sworn.
Okay.
I ran out in the hallway. Official.
Lots of happening.
All right.
That's happening.
How did we want to tackle adding another meeting? Did we want to get something, float some dates now?
There
How
is,
does
in
that
the
work?
packet, there is a list of meetings that are for the upcoming year.
I think we need another meeting.
But we
in
said we
January.
needed to add one.
However, we need to look at the town hall
Meeting
calendar
before
and see, and make sure that all the town meetings are posted so that we can make sure we have a quorum.
So I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
Okay, can you just give a sense of when you think we need this meeting, like roughly speaking?
Probably with a week after the first meeting.
After the January 10th meeting? you
Yes.
mean? Okay, so we're looking for.
So we'll look at the town calendar.
2 weeks after that meeting,
And
sorry.
I can get out, I guess, through my office, a survey, what do you call it, doodle, scheduling, to see people's availability. And to that point, I was going to raise, I just, if I may, have 2 items. One, the thank you for putting together the calendar of long-term meetings for this committee for not only 2024, but looking way ahead to 2025. It is not lost upon many of us, myself included, that there's an awful lot of activity at the town right now with some very important projects, this just being one of them. We have raised with the town, I think it would be great to try and establish a townwide, inclusive of this committee meeting calendar so that we can try to the greatest extent to avoid conflicts. We know that everyone's time is precious and people are split amongst a lot of different commitments, so we will work on that. But thank you for developing that calendar long-term for this committee. The other point that I want to just raise is around a general sense of this committee for meeting format for future meetings. Obviously, we're here tonight in person, and thank you again to WCTV's partnership for covering this as they have throughout. The question around virtual meetings, of course, will always come up, and I just wanted to get a sense of the committee around your preference and how you want to go about meeting in person or virtually as we move forward.
I think I would prefer to continue meeting in person. I just find it much more engaging and much less fatiguing.
Thank you.
To meet in person.
I agree with that.
I would
Because I
agree.
remember not at
I'd rather meet in person.
Would there be an appetite to change the start time from 6 to 6:30
Yes.
PM, allowing for traffic?
So I don't want to speak for the committee. Does that work for?
That's fine.
Yes, that seems good.
And that said, if there is a need to join virtually, whether that be via teleconference, trying to support Zoom is in person is really tough and challenging. I think generally our tech folks would say, but certainly this is a phone and call-in is always an option we could facilitate as well too. So if someone could not get here in person, it was just easier. I think we can accommodate that if that's acceptable to the committee.
How much notice do you need to accommodate that?
Great question.
I think that we need to kind of work through some logistics on that because you can call in, but you won't be able to see the final presentations on the screen. So
I
See if
don't
we
think there's
can-
anything under open meeting. We can check. I don't think there's anything that specifically calls out that, but we can explore that and just make sure that we're keeping in line with the state's intention around that accessibility. Sorry, Julie.
To clarify, Doran Whittier let me know that 2 weeks in between would be preferable, as
Okay.
opposed to 1 week.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's anything else, are there, item number 12, committee questions this evening? Seeing none. Public comment. Any comments from the public tonight?
About Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Are you a member of the public? Technically. Thank you. And with, as has been said, the next meeting for this committee is scheduled for Wednesday, January the 10th. I'll also just, again, for those, hopefully, many folks at home watching, a shout out to anyone who is interested in following this important project. We are working hard to amass all of the materials on the school district's website for anyone who wants to learn more about this, and all of the meetings we will continue with WCTV's partnership to record and make accessible. We want you to be engaged in this important project and are trying to find every avenue to make that possible. Thank you for your flexibility this morning, it seemed like this morning, earlier tonight, and for your patience and your presence here tonight. And with that, looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you.
And roll call. Paul?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
And yes to myself.
Thanks. Happy holidays, everyone, and good evening.
Happy holidays.
Night, everyone.